Hello YouTube. It's another rainy day in Kentucky. We just had real bad floods not too long ago. And that went away, and luckily it didn't rain like a week after that, but now it's raining just about every day. But anyway, Nitrous Mini install. This thing is really cool. I mean, it does everything. I mean, it acts as a miniature tack. It acts as a fuel pressure gauge. If you have the attachment for it for the fuel pressure gauge, it'll also not turn the nitrous on if the fuel pressure isn't high enough. If you have that piece, it acts as a RPM window switch. You can set the nitrous to come on at a certain RPM, and you can set it to shut off at a certain RPM. And then it acts as a progressive controller too, because you can ramp the nitrous in and different percentages, even at different RPMs. I mean, it's really cool. I mean, you can't beat it for $200, and it's really easy to install. But anyway, so the way that he had this nitrous hooked up, we have the he has a little switch right there. It's the far left switch. The middle one ain't hooked up. We'll probably hook that up when we do 2 stages, and then the buttons for the purge. But that's on a 12 volt key on off the fuse box there. It goes into that switch, and then it came out the firewall right there, and then he had that running to each side of the, we'll take this off, to each side of the solenoids. That's blue, that's your nitrous solenoid. That other one to the left of it's the purge. And then your red, which is the fuel solenoid. So he had hot running to both of those. And then he had the ground coming off of each of those. I don't think it matters which wire is hot on these and which is ground. I mean, they don't seem to be marked. If you supply power to one side and ground to the other, they open. But anyway, the other side he had wired in to the micro switch on the bottom, and then at the top it comes out and then goes over to the fuel pressure safety switch and then grounds out right there. And that's the way he had it set up. But then we added the Nitrous Mini here. Let me turn the light off so there ain't no glare. There we go, that's a lot better. So, and this is how I wired this in. So we have trigger input with blue white stripe to TPS or micro switch. So the blue with white stripe is right here. And we ran that around and come up, and it goes to the bottom of the micro switch. And then we come out the top of the micro switch. See, it won't complete the circuit to ground everything out until that closes. And then it comes around and goes to the fuel pressure safety switch and then grounds out. So that's how that wires ran. Right there. Turn the light off again so we can see better. Yep. Okay. So we're only using one channel, so we're doing everything based off of channel 1. The white with blue stripe. Another thing on this is you can set this up different ways. You can have that wire going to a 12 volt source. You can have it going to a throttle position sensor, or you can have it going to ground. We've got it going to ground. So, and you set that up inside the handheld here, and I'll show you that here in a minute. Now the next thing is we have the 12 volt from, trying to focus and read it through the screen here. Yeah, there we go. Switch 12 volt from arming switch. So the wire that he had for the positive for each for each one of the solenoids, I ran it to that white wire. See, it says white right there. Switch 12 volts from arming switch, white wire. So from that arming switch in there that's hooked up to key on hot, it comes out, and then we hook that to this white wire, which is, yeah, it's this one, the white wire, and that's where it comes out of the firewall. So key on switch hot wire from your nitrous switch comes out and supplies 12 volts to the white wire. The white and blue wire for stage 1, it goes to your micro switch and through a fuel pressure safety switch, or to a throttle position sensor switch, depending on what you got. And then this big blue wire grounds out. This is the ground for both of the solenoids, for the fuel and the nitrous solenoid. So I just ran that up to right here, and then I tied them in all together. It changes to a red wire, and then it comes up and it ties in. This blue wire goes to the nitrous solenoid, and then this red wire goes over to the fuel solenoid. So that's the ground. And there's some grounds you got to hook up here. This big ground right here, this big black one, that's what grounds these two out that go to the grounds for each solenoid. And then there's a little bitty black ground that comes out of that one, and I've got it there too. I've grounded them on the firewall right there, and that grounds for the handheld. Okay, so we got that. So that's what grounds it all out. It just grounds the solenoids out for them to come on, but then we still need power for the solenoids for when they do come on. So what I did, this has a battery in the trunk, so the battery comes up to the starter and then just straight to the alternator with that big wire right there. So I just ran the hot side for each solenoids directly to the alternator. So that's the hot. And then there was a couple of other wires that we needed to hook up. We needed, up here at the top, channel 1, right here. Channel 1 output, I can't talk, control yellow 12 volts. So that's the output that tells, that you send to the ignition box. The ignition box, I have an input for retard timing. So that's the wire, the yellow wire. It goes in there and it hooks to the ignition box. And then when the nitrous comes on, the Nitrous Mini supplies 12 volts to that yellow wire. And then we've got it ran to the pink wire on the ignition box. And when the nitrous comes on, the Nitrous Mini sends 12 volts to that wire. And when the ignition box sees that 12 volts, it retards the timing. Okay? And then there's the tack wire, which is this green one. So that green one we needed to run to the ignition box for the tack signal, which was the gray wire coming out of the ignition box. And the ignition box we use is the 6AL-2.
Here's a quick view of the diagram for the 6AL-2 programmable ignition box. Right here in red is the pink wire for the timing retard, and then right here in gray is the output for the tack signal.
Programmable. So the gray wire from the ignition box runs to the tack in the car, and then it runs to this green wire. So the handheld can get a reading of the RPMs of the vehicle. But yeah, that's basically it. I mean, it was that easy to install. There's, you know, no relays, no nothing. We're just using channel 1 right there. So digital ground black, ground for handheld. We hooked that one right there on the firewall by the Nitrous Mini controller. That's the controller. And yeah, we grounded it over there. And then well, it was focused and I messed it up. Alright, and then channel 1 output control yellow we sent that down to the ignition box, the pink wire off the ignition box, that the retard wire off of the ignition box. That way when the ignition box sees the 12 volts, it pulls the timing. And then the TAC input green to TAC signal, we ran that to the ignition box, which was the gray wire on the 6AL2 programmable. And that way the handheld can see the RPM and knows if you're using it for a window switch, it knows when to turn it off and on. So trigger input channel 1, right there, white with blue stripe, to TPS or micro switch. We sent that to the micro switch for the wide open throttle switch, and then we sent it to the fuel pressure safety switch, and that's what grounds everything out to tell it when to come on. So when it's reading, when the fuel pressure safety switch is above the fuel pressure you have it set to come on, it completes that circuit. And when you're at wide open throttle and the wide open throttle switch gets pressed, and then it completes that circuit and it grounds it out. And then we got switch 12 volt from arming switch. Okay, so we brought that one off the fuse box, and the key on hot. We ran it to a toggle switch inside the car I showed you earlier, and then we ran that to that white wire. And then down here, we're not using, we're probably going to get this sooner or later, the pressure transducer. Yeah, that way we can see our nitrous pressure on the nitrous handheld, Nitrous Mini handheld. But anyway, you ground this big wire out, and that acts as the ground for these wires. So we're using channel 1 again, we're not using channel 2. So we run that wire to both sides of the solenoids, the nitrous solenoid and the fuel solenoid. And then the other wire coming out of the nitrous and fuel solenoid, we ran that straight to power on the back of the alternator, or wherever you want to run that to, as long as you're getting 12 volts on this side, and then this is your ground on the other side. And that was pretty much it, man. This thing is easy to hook up.
I'm going to stop right here and explain something here real quick, because this diagram right here is a little misleading, because typically on these diagrams, blue means nitrous and red means fuel. Now if you look on here, and it shows the blue one going to a fuel solenoid, or it shows the blue one going to a blue nitrous solenoid, and it shows a red one going to a red fuel solenoid, which is very misleading. That's not the way you hook this up. You hook it up as I explained in the directions there. The blue is channel 1. So for channel stage 1, you want that blue wire going to both the nitrous and fuel side. And then if you was hooking up channel 2, the red one, that one would also go to both the nitrous and the fuel solenoids for your channel 2 second stage. But I just wanted to make sure I brought that up, because that's very misleading.
And I mean, it works awesome. I mean, check this out. And this right here it's really cool. But on this right here, on these wires right here, you know, it says 4 TPS or micro switch. You have to actually go in the handheld and set this. Because when I first hooked this thing up, it didn't work, and I was like, oh no, it doesn't work. What happened? So mine initially came as micro switch to 12 volt source. So I had to actually go in here and set it up to micro switch to ground. And then it started working. But my biggest question on this was the micro switch. Let's see if you can see this better with the light out. Yeah, there we go. So, and I mean, I wasn't sure. It said it could be a 12 volt ground. It said it could be or a 12 volt, or it could go to a ground, or it could go to a throttle position sensor. So what's kind of cool is you go up here to settings, Nitrous Config, stage 1, setup, and then right there, see if we can focus better. Oh, I just made it worse, didn't I? Let me look at it. It's got deactivation RPM. It's got activation RPM. It's got a ramp you can build in it, and whether you're using a throttle position sensor. And that's it's pretty cool because when this stuff ain't hooked up, it knows it, and it marks it as yeah, here we go, right here. Right here, throttle position sensor mode. Is that what that says? TPAS mode. Anyway, yeah, click on that. And then I don't know if you can see it or not, but yeah, it says wide open throttle to 12 volts, throttle position sensor to 90%, or wide open throttle to ground. So it comes preset wide open throttle to 12 volts. And it wasn't working for me at first, and I was like, no, I must have did something wrong. But now I just came in here and went wide open to ground, and then it started working. But I mean, this thing's cool. These things are only $200, and they're pretty easy to set up. And I mean, it acts like a Windows switch and a progressive controller all in one. Plus, if you get some of the adapters for it, you can also set up the bottle pressure. So, I mean, and it's all hooked up now. So, no. I dropped that down in there. Look at that, like an idiot. Oh yeah, I got it out. All right, but yeah, that's cool as can be. Here, let me show you what we're talking about. We'll get in here, turn the key on. And we'll turn the nitrous switch on. There we go. So now, the handheld should come on. There we go. So there's the handheld, and there's your little mini RPM. Find the stylus here for it. I'm going to run this back through the dash as well and put it in the inside of the car. I just had it out here where I could play with it a little bit. But check this thing out, man. It does all kinds of stuff. Now you can save and load. You can configure settings. We'll start down here at the bottom. So you can do like a calibration on it. You can check the controller info. It'll tell you the last time it was updated, stuff like that. You got the dash set up. Mini tack display, RPM, max tack display. Minimum tack display, you can set that to where it shows 1,000 up or whatever, and then you got the max for that RPM display that you see, and then bottle pressure. This thing's really cool because I mean, it knows if it's not hooked up. I mean, you can have things hooked up and just not have the power to them or anything, but somehow it just knows they're not hooked up. So, I mean, it already knows that that's not hooked up and it's disabled it. But, and then, all right. And then that's pretty much for that screen. Oh, there we go. See, like you can save and load tunes. You can like save different tunes in here. And then, like, oh, we're going to 100, you can save like, oh, we're going to save this one for 150 shot and save it. And then when you change jets for 150 shot, you come in here and just load it, so that's kind of cool. And then Nitrous Config, we'll go into system setup. So RPM signal type 8 cylinders. So you want to make sure that you set that to how many cylinders you got. And that's pretty much it for that. And then stage 1s. So like stage 2, it's not hooked up. And it knows that. So as soon as you go in here, see, it's blank. It knows it's not hooked up, which is really cool. But then you go to stage 2, and then you go to setup, and there we go. So stage 1 enabled, activate RPM 0. You can click, like I can click on that one, I can disable it. I can click on this one and set the RPM to a different thing. And then deactivation RPM. And then, you know, you can run a ramp builder in here, or you can turn it off. You can have it start at, you know, 0% and end at 100, and then the delay time, the ramp time, the duration of the stage, and everything, man. It's just really cool. And you can actually pull up a graph of it too, of how it's going to ramp up and stuff. So I mean, that's really cool. But I mean, we'll just do some testing here real quick. Ramp builder, we're going to start at 100%. There we go. All right. I just want to test to make sure it works. When you go back to this home screen, let's just hit this button. All right. Now, what I did to test this thing, we're at 0 RPMs. So it should come on with the motor not even running. What I did was I have to ground out the fuel pressure safety switch here. We have to bypass that because I'd have to start the motor to be able to build up enough pressure, and then you can't hear the solenoids. But anyway, now when we hit the micro switch, we should hear both solenoids click on, and then right there it should say stage 1 on. See, my ground's not that good. That's why it kind of, I got it just barely holding on right there, but pull that a little tighter, it should. There we go. So you hear both solenoids come on. And I'm going to lay the camera down and I'm going to feel both of them just to make sure. Because when you hear one, yep, I felt them both. And they're both coming on. And when I click this, it says stage 1 on. Now, to check to make sure that the RPM's working without with no RPMs, let's go in here and set it. Oops. Yeah. Let's set up this thing. My phone's crappy. Let's set it to come on at 90 RPM. Now when we hit the micro switch, it should not come on because we're at 0 RPM. And there you go, nothing. So I mean, that's all set up. The next thing to do to test it is to set it at 1,000 RPM, bring the car up to 1,000 RPM and hit it and see if it comes on. And if, you know, and hopefully that works. That way we can get an idea if it's working based off of the engine RPM. And then another thing we need to test is we need to turn it on and see if it's pulling timing. So I need to hook the computer up to the ignition box, and I'll probably lock it out flat, like 36 degrees across, 32 degrees across, and let it idle there. And then hit the micro switch. The nitrous bottle ain't hooked up, so that ain't gonna spray. So the fuel solenoid is going to spray, and it's probably going to bog the motor down, but I just need to be able to see quick enough to see if it pulls the timing, which it'll probably kill the motor when it tosses all that fuel in there. I think I've got a cap for that AM fitting, so I might just take that AM fitting off and cap it. That way no bunch of fuel goes splashing in there and causes problems, too much fuel. But yeah, I'll probably just cap that off and then hit the nitrous. It idles. I'll set the idle over 1,000. I'll put the controller over 1,000 RPM. I'll have the idle set at 1,000 RPM. I'll have the timing locked out straight across the board at like whatever it's at right now. I think it's at 36. And then I'll hit the switch, and make sure it reads on, put it over 1,000 RPM. That'll tell me, and then I'll check the time, and that'll tell me if it's going to come on based on engine RPM. And then I'll have a timing light pointing down there to check to make sure it's pulling the timing. I'll hook the computer up to the ignition box and set the retard at like 8, and then I'll have the motor locked out at whatever, at 36, and then when I pull the timing, it should drop to 28 degrees if my math serves me correctly. But yeah, the next thing I need to do after we test all that, well, I gotta put it back together anyway, because it ain't gonna start like that with everything unhooked. I just unhooked that so I could get the wires better, but I was looking online for that hole's 1.5 inches wide. I was looking for a grommet to fit in there, but there's 3 wires molded into that rubber piece. I'm gonna try to cut those out and then find a grommet to put in there. And I'll just slit the grommet to get the wires, put the wires around it, and then put it in the hole. But yeah, I'm gonna have to fix that, and then we gotta run the handheld wire through there too. And then I got some wire loom over here to try to make everything pretty. But another thing on these fuel pressure safety switch, I think this one came preset at 5 and we just left it like that. But I'm probably going to test this before we go spraying a bunch of nitrous. So what you want to do when you test these things is, we've got a mechanical fuel pump, so the motor's got to be running to test it. If you have an electrical fuel pump, you can just turn the electrical one on. But you want to have your fuel solenoid to where it's draining in a fuel bucket or something like that, and then just supply power and run the ground through the fuel pressure safety switch. And then that way it opens up. And what we do is he's got a regulator on it, and set the regulator. This motor operates at, per Pro Systems, the carburetor, they said to run the fuel pressure at 8. But to test the solenoids, you can put the fuel pressure at 5 with your fuel pressure regulator. And then you just take that out, and there's a little screw in there. And then while it's running at 5 psi and the fuel draining into a bucket, just turn it until the fuel the fuel solenoid closes and no more fuel's coming out of your line, and then open it back up until it opens the fuel solenoid up again and fuel starts running again. And there you are, you're set at 5 psi. And then you can set your regulator back up to what your carburetor likes, which ours is 8. And then you're set. If your fuel pressure ever drops below 5, it'll open that circuit, and you won't complete the circuit to ground no more, and it'll shut the nitrous off. So them fuel pressure safety switches are really, really beneficial when you're running nitrous, because if you ever spray nitrous and you lean it out, you're going to break something. I mean, it's as simple as that. And if your fuel pressure drops for whatever reason, and you're still spraying a ton of nitrous in there, you're going to lean out. So that's what the fuel pressure safety switch is for. It reads the pressure, and if your fuel pressure drops, say your fuel pump fails or whatever, and your fuel pressure drops too low, it shuts the nitrous off really quick. And that's that. So, and you want to make sure your jets match the fuel pressure that you're running. So we're running 8 psi fuel pressure, so we got 8 psi jets, and that's pretty much it. Easy to install. White blue wire went up to the micro switch through the fuel pressure safety switch, grounded out. The white wire goes to your arming switch inside the car that's fed with a 12-volt key-on source. This goes to each solenoid, the fuel and the nitrous on one side, and then the other wire on your fuel and nitrous goes straight to a hot wire, and then you ground these 2 wires out, If you got an ignition box that pulls timing, or you want this to see the RPM and stuff like that, you run your green wire in there and hook it up to whatever RPM, whatever feed you have for your RPM that comes off, that goes to your tack or whatever. And then the yellow wire is the wire that would go to an ignition box for the 12 volts to pull the timing retard. And I mean, that's it. That was easy. Yep. And now fix that grommet, put everything in some wire loom, and hook everything back up, do those tests I was talking about early, call it done. Man, for 200 bucks, you just can't beat that. Y'all have a good day. And here's what we got for the finished product. I put everything in wire looms. I wish I had black zip ties, but I didn't. And I loomed it all up. It looks a lot better, in my opinion. Oh, I also cut a vacuum hose. You just put it around the top of that. And then cut the grommet in half. And left the grommet on the bottom half. And then spliced a vacuum line to protect the top there. And that ain't going nowhere. I had a hard time getting that in there. But yeah, that's it. I think it looks good in my opinion. Tomorrow, I'm going to have somebody come out and help me and get it running and make sure it's pulling timing. And there's something else I needed to do. Make sure it's pulling timing. Well, that's the most important thing. Make sure it's pulling timing. And make sure that it comes on with RPM. We're going to make sure, I'm going to set it to like 1,000. Make sure it comes on over, when I go over 1,000, or when it's over 1,000 RPM. And that's it. That is done. Next up is a catch can.